Hey there, kiddos. Welcome back. Now we're going to start on chapter 11, which is gender and sexuality. So, when the book talks about defining what sex is, it's talking about defining as either male or female. And the way the textbook defines to be either male or female has to do with your chromosomes. So you've got 23 sets of chromosomes, right? 46. Well, on that last set, that 23rd set, you either have an XX or an XY. Now, the XX chromosome is a female. XY chromosome is a male. Okay. So part of defining also what sex is, as far as being either male or female, you have gonads. And the gonads are the hormone side of what makes one male or what makes one female. So the gonads in females are the ovaries, and the gonads in the males are the testes. And these gonads play a role in the development of the internal reproductive structures and the external genitalia, as well as secondary sex characteristics. So, and of course, the internal reproductive structures are in women are the ovaries, the uterus, and then, of course, the external genitalia, and then the secondary characteristics are, things that happen during the course of that maturation. So when it talks about the differences, and then, of course, there's the gender. All right, so gender has more to do, I guess, with traditionally, okay? Now, with the modern day, or with current events, I guess you could say, as far as gender orientation, whether one defines themselves as male or female, or something else, okay? So this chapter, or this textbook, doesn't take into consideration anything other than male or female. And as far as sexual orientation goes, it talks about either homosexuals or heterosexuals. All right, so the book doesn't really get into a whole lot of detail about other orientations, so I hope you don't find it to be offensive, because it's not meant to be offensive. It's just meant to get down at that rudimentary DNA genetic level of what does your biology say. So it's not saying that, so you were born with XX but you feel XY. That's not what the book is saying. The book is simply saying that if you're born with that 23rd set of chromosome being XX, you are genetically female. On the flip side, if you're born with that 23rd set of chromosomes being XY, then genetically you're male. All right, so that's what it talks about when it talks about sex. Now, gender has more to do, again, it's the book is taking into consideration, or the textbook is taking into consideration, that if you're a female, then you're going to feel feminine. If you're male, then you're going to feel masculine. Now, of course, there are varying degrees in each of those sets of people, but, okay, again, it's not about being disrespectful to anybody. It's just getting down to what the biology is, and where you take it from there, is absolutely a personal decision. The thing with when we talk about aggression as far as gender differences, typically males are more aggressive than females, and the reason that is, or overtly aggressive, I guess you could say, I mean physical, or verbal harm, being verbally abusive or physically abusive, is because they have what comes from that, or what causes that, is testosterone. Testosterone is the sex drive, it's the rage, it's the anger, it's what causes a lot of aggression in people. So if men have more testosterone than normal, then they're going to be more aggressive. If women have more testosterone, then they may have facial hair, they may have difficulties with reproducing, getting pregnant, or being able to carry that pregnancy to term. However, the flip side of that is what they call relational aggression, which is harm in social standing. Women are really good about being what my husband and I call passive aggressive. It's not a psychological term anymore, but basically it's saying what I need to say to your face to deal with whatever it is I'm dealing with, but then when I leave, I'm going to talk about you behind your back. Or women are more apt to attack on social media, whereas men they're really more of a physical, get in there and let's beat the snot out of each other, whereas women are going to talk about it to death. Why that is typically characteristic of both males and females, I don't know. That's something for you to think about. But there's some things in there that, again, testosterone can cause an issue. Estrogen can cause an issue. If a man produces too much estrogen, he could then develop man boobs. He can develop more of a high-pitched voice. He can be a little smaller in stature maybe than his cohorts. But testosterone and estrogen tend to play a role in why the aggression is different in one population versus another. Of course, this is where the book does talk about the differences in sexuality. The females tend to be more selective in their regards to casual sex, whereas males are more often aroused and have a stronger sex drive and less fidelity. Now, does that make it across the board? Absolutely not. There's something that I heard a long, long time ago that said women need a reason and men need a place. Whether or not that's true, again, that's not up for me to decide. It's simply going on a typical normative reaction of women tend to be a little more selective in their sex partners, whereas males are more apt to be less faithful to one sexual partner. Women technically are a little more likely to engage in bisexuality or tend to be aroused by bisexual stimuli. That's not to say that men don't. It's just that women tend to be a little more open to it. Now, again, I've heard it said that, women don't mind being called bisexual. Men tend to have a little stronger aggression towards that. They don't, and maybe things are changing. These are just what I have been introduced to over the years. But some explanations also, the biological or the genetic hormonal differences, the testosterone. If you've got a lot of testosterone, again, you're a man's man. If you've got a lot of estrogen, then you're a woman's woman, and so it has a lot to do with just how your body processes all of these biological and genetic hormones. And of course, some of it has to do with evolution. in that in our core, or at our core, even if you go back to the caveman days, the whole point behind women being created the way they are and men being created the way they are is to perpetuate the species. So because of that, there is that more or less that natural desire to mate with the opposite sex so that you can then continue on your species or your family tree, right? So because if we have same sex sexual partners, then there obviously isn't going to be that perpetuation of our gender, or not our gender, but perpetuation of our generations. But when the book will talk about, when it talks about sexual orientation, it talks about the direction of what erotic interests are. And of course, when it talks about erotic interest, it's more than just sexual behavior, okay? Erotic interest, and for some women, and for most women, and for some men, it's more of an emotional connection. The eroticism comes from the emotion or the proximity, not necessarily in certain sexual behaviors. Now, as far as the population goes, 90% of the population right now is 90% heterosexual. And then the remaining 10% make up the homosexual and then bisexual population. But when we talk about what makes a person, what defines a person's orientation, or what causes a person's orientation, understand that, being raised by a gay parent isn't going to make one gay. Somebody's parenting style, your parents' parenting style, or how you parent your child isn't going to make a person gay. If a child has sexual experimentation as preteens, as teenagers, even if they experiment with same-sex relationships, that does not make them gay. Some people say you're either born gay or you're not. Others say they either choose to be gay or choose not to be, or choose to be bisexual or homosexual based on, or because of, not based on, but because of experiences. So if you've had a traumatic experience with the opposite sex, then you're going to have more of a negative reaction to the opposite sex. Therefore, you're going to be more attracted to the same sex because of that's just where you feel safe. And it's not good or bad, it's just simply the way something is. Now, we have seen, because of that, you see that there's not a single cause of what causes orientation. And even within a group, there's going to be variation. So even if you divide people up into, say, okay, this is the homosexual group and this is the heterosexual group, there's going to be variations in that. Not everybody in the homosexual group is going to behave and act a certain way, just like the people in the heterosexual group aren't always going to behave and act in a certain way. Right? So, and there's also going to be similarities between the sexes. Just because, a man likes to cook doesn't mean anything other than he likes to cook. A woman that likes to go out and do the lawn is nothing more than a woman that likes to go out and do the lawn. So just because one sees oneself as homosexual doesn't mean that they're going to be an interior designer and very prissy and, well-mannered. Just like a homosexual female may not necessarily be butch. Okay, I know plenty of heterosexual women who are very manly in their, as far as behaviors go, or what we would typify as, having male characteristics. It's just part of who we are, as people. We as our society evolves, we're going to be more apt to try to do other things and expand our own boundaries beyond what are typical male and typical female roles. Where a typical female role, 60, 70 years ago was for the woman to stay home with the children. It's getting to be almost as common now that the men stay home with the children instead of having just a housewife. You may now have a house husband because that may be what he wants to do. My neighbor's next door, she's very much the, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to play hard, I'm going to, take care of my husband, and he can go work what he want, where he wants, and he does. And she's out there just as often as he is mowing the grass. But that's what she chooses to do, and that's what he then chooses to do, right? So, but what are some things that are linked to or influenced by orientation, or orientation it can be influenced by some things, is genetics. Again, it's, your hormone levels. What are your, what does your DNA look like? Is your DNA XXY or XXY, which is, hermaphroditism. Hermaphrodism. And is having both the female and the male sexual genitalia or hormones. Sometimes the corpus callosum, the thickness and the hemispheric symmetry of the corpus callosum, if the brain isn't quite connected the way it should be. Some people say prenatal hormones can affect the orientation of a child. And then, of course, there are social factors. There's not one thing that will cause a person to be either homosexual or heterosexual. It's a very personal choice. Again, the book isn't trying to be disrespectful. The book is just simply trying to come at it from a scientific perspective. The thing with, of course, when you look at both the homosexual and the heterosexual population, you're going to find similar attitudes, you're going to find similar psychological adjustments, similar hobbies, activities, occupations, but there are also going to be differences. I mean, what I tell my kids is, you're nice to somebody until they're just not nice to you. I don't go up and ask people, excuse me, before I get to know you, are you homosexual or heterosexual? Because, if you're one way or the other, I can't be your friend. No, that's not how I've raised my kids to be. I've raised my kids to say, hey, look, you are who you are, and as long as you're respectful to me, I'll be respectful to you. So, but if you are in a position where you find or you come to the understanding that you are homosexual, then some of the things you have to worry about are prejudices and discrimination. And on some level, everybody has to deal with it. We're discriminated against because we're of the color of our skin. We're discriminated against because we're either male or female, or your religion or your race or your ethnic background or whatever. But of particular interest here, anyway, at this point, is when the person is in the process of coming out of the closet, there are going to be some things that they're going to have to deal with, and the whole prejudice and discrimination is going to be more prominent if they were in a predominantly heterosexual environment and homosexuality is frowned upon. Then there's going to be more issues as the person reveals more about who they are psychologically. On the flip side of that, however, if they're in an environment that is very open and accepting of gender differences and sexual differences or sexual identity, then that's going to kind of help ease them into that transition. As far as relationships go, relationships Heterosexuals do tend to report greater homosexuals tend to report greater satisfaction in relationships than heterosexuals. But homosexuals are more likely to end relationships than heterosexuals are. Homosexual families are less likely to have children. However, if a gay couple has children, then there doesn't seem to be any difference from children raised in heterosexual household. So from there, it kind of goes into sexual behavior. The textbook kind of goes right into sexual behavior. So what then constitutes sexual behavior? It's infidelity, loss of virginity, activities involved in reproduction, arousal and sexual response, intimate personal activities. These are what constitutes sexual behavior. This is what sexual behavior is all about. Now, when you talk about the pattern of sexual behavior as far as the sexual response to just in general, you've the excitement phase, then you've got the plateau, then you've got the orgasm, and then you've got the resolution, which is that afterglow, or that oh my god, I need a cigarette kind of moment. And in males, they have what they call a refractory period, in that males sometimes can have up to 24 hours before they're able to orgasm again. And that's just because the way the male body works. It's a little bit different than the female, because with a male's orgasm, there's more times than not the ejaculation, which is a build-up process. And if the ejaculation is complete, then there's nothing left, so then there has to be this whole build-up again. And so that refractory period may last up to 12 to 24 hours. Women don't necessarily have to deal with that issue quite as much. However, in some women, it does. Now, this is not an absolute. This isn't to say that every man deals with this and every woman doesn't. It just simply, again, an overly generalistic view of life in general. So how we deal with, our sexual, what cognitive factors are involved in sexual behavior. We think about self-monitoring or self-regulation, what we are and aren't going to do, how much fantasy and imagery do we use, and, are there sexual scripts that we go by? Are there things that we have to do? Are there, an A to a B to a C? What things are there, that we have to do. This rascal says hello. It's just a script. Is you have to do this, and then you have to do that, and that again, it's all a personal choice, and certainly very it's a very personal issue, whether or not you disclose or not, as to what your routine, I guess, is. However, there are sexual variations and sexual disorders. Now, not all variations are disorders, although all disorders do have some type of variations. Now, a fetish is basically one cannot perform sexually unless something is present. You've heard of shoes or hose, or like stockings or certain outfits. Absolutely okay, as long as both parties are okay with it. And then you've got paraphilias. Pedophilia is one that's a disorder. Pedophilia is being, having an attraction of somebody under the age of consent. Different states have different ages of consent. However, most, most of the time, it's under the age of 18. But pedophilia, usually pedophiles are interested in prepubescent children. And once the child goes through puberty, then that, that desire tends to wane in the person, because what they're interested in or what they're attracted to is that lack of maybe pubic hair, that lack of, for females, that lack of breasts or things of that nature. But again, that's a disorder. Yes, I see you. Disorders of sexual disorders of sexual desire and response. Some things are just not appropriate to respond sexually to, and then respond to, and then just some things are just not appropriate to desire. We don't want to, sex with animals is not a socially acceptable behavior. You're shedding and you're getting in my nose. All right. So things of that nature. There's also some other disorders. Females can have arousal disorder, and then of course males can have erectile dysfunction, which is just their inability to create or to maintain an arousal. Then you've got your sexually transmitted infections. Some bacterial infections are gonorrhea and syphilis. These can be treated by antibiotics. However, viruses like herpes or HIV, they can be treated with antivirals, but they cannot be cured. Bacterial infections can be cured because it is a bacterial infection. Careful. But viruses are viral, and once a virus enters the body, unless it has a finite lifespan, it is forever in the body. So how do you keep from getting sexually transmitted infections? First off, practice safe sex. The best way not to get an STI is abstinence, meaning no sex, period. Because you can obviously get sexual transmitted infections even with oral sex. So not just genitals, sex, involving genitalia, but also oral sex as well. Risk can be reduced by using condoms, but you also have to be you have to psychologically be you have to be psychologically aware. People who tend to have less psychological awareness, or tend to be a little more on the less, I don't know how you would say it, but tend to be a little less faithful and more curious, and are more apt to participate in behaviors that aren't completely safe. Right? Sorry, tough chapter, because my biggest fear is always stepping on somebody's toes, and being less than sensitive, and I don't mean to be that way. It's just when you're talking, this is, gender and sexuality is a very personal and a very private matter. And so, there's not necessarily one right way or one wrong way. You just have to understand who you are, and then be accepting of that, and surround yourself with those that accept you for who you are and what you are. But either way, it's a very intimate and very personal and very private issue for everybody to deal with. All right, so that's it for chapter 11. Along with this video, you will also see the chapter questions, the page numbers to help with the chapter questions, and then of course the PowerPoint presentation. And of course, as always, if you need anything, let me know. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you later. Bye.